The morning sun stretched across the marble steps of the Providence Municipal Court, painting long shadows on the street as a sleek black car glided to a stop by the curb. The engine purred, the kind that didn't just hum, it announced itself. From the back seat stepped Ethan Romano, 22, confident, untouchable. His designer jacket caught the light. His phone never left his hand. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth as he typed one last message before pocketing the device, glancing at the courthouse like it was a stage built for him. Inside, the courtroom murmured with quiet anticipation. The bailiff's voice echoed, firm and official. Case of Ethan Romano. Heads turned. Even the air seemed to shift. Ethan walked in slowly, his footsteps deliberate, the faint scent of expensive cologne trailing behind him. His sunglasses dangled from his hand as he took his place at the defendant's stand, his expression detached, almost amused. He didn't glance at the judge, nor at the audience. He stood as if the entire process was beneath him. Behind the bench, Judge Frank Caprio adjusted his glasses, eyes narrowing slightly. He had seen every kind of person step into his courtroom, the nervous, the desperate, the remorseful. But arrogance had a way of standing out. "Good morning," the judge began, voice steady and warm, yet edged with curiosity. Ethan nodded without a word, still half smiling. The judge continued, "You're Mr. Romano?" "Yeah," Ethan replied, his tone casual, dismissive. A faint ripple of discomfort moved through the room. Judge Caprio leaned back, studying him. There was no anger in his eyes, only the quiet patience of a man who'd spent a lifetime teaching lessons few schools could offer. The bailiff handed over the case file, reckless driving, multiple unpaid tickets. Caprio opened it, flipping through the pages as the sound of paper filled the silence. Ethan glanced at his watch, tapping his foot impatiently. "Busy morning?" the judge asked without looking up. Ethan shrugged. You could say that. A few quiet chuckles from the audience were quickly silenced by the judge's raised hand. "We'll try not to keep you from your important schedule," Caprio replied dryly, his tone polite but layered with meaning. Ethan crossed his arms, unbothered. To him, this wasn't justice. It was theater. To everyone else, it was a test. The judge set the file down gently, eyes fixed on the young man. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the ceiling fan and the faint creak of wooden benches filled the pause. Then Caprio leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but deliberate. "Mr. Romano," he said, "before we begin, I'd like to ask you one thing. Do you take this court seriously?" Ethan blinked, unsure how to respond. The smirk wavered for just a second, barely noticeable. But enough. The judge's gaze didn't break. The room felt smaller, quieter. Something in the judge's stillness demanded attention. It wasn't authority through fear. It was the kind that came from wisdom, from presence. Ethan shifted his weight, suddenly aware that all eyes were on him. And then, in that quiet tension, Judge Caprio raised an eyebrow ever so slightly, a gesture subtle enough to draw the line between patience and warning. The young man exhaled sharply, still pretending not to care, but something in his composure had cracked. The calm before the storm had begun to take form, and though Ethan didn't know it yet, the lesson waiting for him would cost far more than any fine could measure. Ethan slouched in the defendant's chair, legs stretched out, his head tilted slightly to the side, like a man waiting for something far less important than his time. The courtroom buzzed softly, a few whispers, the scratch of pens, the shuffle of papers, until Judge Caprio spoke. His voice, calm but firm, carried through the chamber. "Mr. Ethan Romano, you stand here today, charged with reckless driving and multiple unpaid violations. He looked down at the papers before him, his glasses catching the faint glow of the overhead lights. Your vehicle was clocked at 45 in a 20-mile zone, and it appears this isn't your first offense. A faint smirk crept across Ethan's face. He chuckled under his breath, barely audible, but just enough. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, shaking his head as if the entire courtroom was in on some private joke. The sound, small as it was, rippled through the silent room like a spark. A few people turned to look. The bailiff's jaw tightened. Judge Caprio paused mid-sentence, setting his pen down slowly. The silence grew heavier. He raised his eyes. "You find this funny, son?" The question wasn't loud, but it landed like a hammer. Ethan's smirk faltered for a second, but then he shrugged. "It's just a few tickets, Your Honor. I've got money. I can pay whatever it is." He leaned back, confident again. The arrogance in his tone hung in the air like cigarette smoke. Caprio's gaze didn't waver. He folded his hands neatly, his expression unreadable. "You can pay whatever it is," he repeated softly, as if tasting the words. "Tell me, Mr. Romano, how many of these, whatever it is, fines, have you already ignored?" Ethan's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. He hadn't expected the question. I just forgot," he said, waving it off. The judge nodded slowly. "Forgot." He turned a page in the file. 3 speeding tickets, 2 parking violations, 1 unpaid fine from nearly a year ago. He looked up again. "That's a lot of forgetting, son." The audience stirred. Someone whispered. Someone else sighed. Ethan crossed his arms again, deflecting with a smirk that was beginning to feel forced. Caprio adjusted his glasses, his tone measured and calm. "You see, Mr. Romano, there's something you should understand. This courtroom isn't here to collect your money. It's here to protect lives. Yours and everyone else's who shares the road with you." Ethan's smile faded just a little more. "You drive through neighborhoods where children cross the street, where parents trust that people will follow the law, and you think it's all a joke?" Ethan looked away. For the first time, the confidence in his eyes dimmed. Judge Caprio leaned forward, elbows resting on the bench, his voice dropping low, almost a whisper now, the kind that demanded attention. "Money can pay fines," he said, pausing long enough for the words to settle. "But it can't buy respect." The room went silent again. Even Ethan didn't move. The weight of that single sentence hung heavy in the air, like truth finally catching up to arrogance. The air in the courtroom had changed. Heavier now, as though everyone sensed the quiet storm beneath Judge Caprio's calm expression. He sat perfectly still, hands folded, the soft light from the high windows outlining the creases of experience on his face. Across from him, Ethan leaned back, one arm draped over the bench behind him. He wore that same half-smile, the one that had carried him through every situation where money could make problems disappear. Caprio's tone was steady, almost gentle. "Mr. Romano," he began, "I'd like to hear from you directly. Why do you think you're here today?" Ethan smirked. "I mean, honestly, I don't even need to be here. My lawyer could have handled this." He shrugged casually, glancing toward the camera as if the whole thing were some kind of show. "My dad owns Romano Imports, big car dealerships all over the state. We're not exactly struggling to pay a few speeding tickets." His words lingered like arrogance painted into the air. The audience shifted in their seats, a mix of disbelief and quiet judgment filling the room. Caprio listened, his face giving away nothing. He didn't interrupt. He simply nodded once, almost like a teacher letting a student finish an excuse he'd already heard too many times. Ethan continued, his confidence growing. "Look, no disrespect, Judge, but I've got better things to do. I'm just here so I don't get another warrant or whatever." A few quiet gasps rose from the gallery. The bailiff shot Ethan a sharp glance, but the judge remained unshaken. When Caprio finally spoke, his voice was calm enough to make the silence feel deliberate. "Better things to do," he repeated softly. "Like what, son?" Ethan smirked again. "Like running a business. I manage one of my dad's dealerships. You know, real work." He leaned forward now, his tone dripping with confidence. "No offense, but I don't see how sitting here over some tickets really matters." Caprio let the moment breathe. The clock on the wall ticked faintly. Then, with the faintest trace of a smile, he said, "You remind me of someone I once knew." Ethan frowned, uncertain whether it was a compliment or a warning. Caprio's eyes softened, but his tone held gravity. "There was a boy, not much older than you," he said slowly, his gaze distant now, like he was pulling a memory out of the past. He thought rules didn't apply to him, that his family's name could protect him from the consequences of his choices. The courtroom fell completely still. Even Ethan, for the first time, didn't interrupt. Caprio leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bench. That boy had everything: money, privilege, confidence, but not a drop of respect. Not for others, and not for himself. The judge's voice was steady, but every word felt carved with purpose. Ethan swallowed, the smirk fading slightly. Caprio's eyes met his. "You know what happened to that boy?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. The judge paused, his tone lowering to almost a whisper, warm yet cutting through the silence. "Let me tell you a story about a boy just like you." The room seemed to exhale into stillness as Judge Caprio's voice softened. He rested his hands on the bench, eyes distant, as though he were seeing something long ago. "There was a boy," he began quietly, "not too different from you, Mr. Romano. Thought he owned the world. Thought rules were made for everyone else." The camera lingered on his face, calm, composed, yet carrying the quiet weight of memory. The light in the courtroom shifted, a warmer hue falling across the judge's features, contrasting the coldness that had filled the space moments ago. He continued, his voice deliberate, each word carrying the rhythm of experience. This boy came from a good family, parents who loved him, teachers who believed in him. But he wanted things easy, fast. He didn't see value in earning respect. He only wanted to be seen. He paused briefly, glancing toward Ethan, who was listening now despite himself. One night, he took his father's car without permission, a beautiful red convertible. He wanted to show it off to his friends, drive through the city, music blasting, laughing at how untouchable he felt. The judge's gaze dropped momentarily to the desk, and his voice grew softer. He ran a red light. The words landed heavy. The faint hum of the lights above was the only sound left. He didn't see the man crossing the street with his daughter. The father survived. The girl didn't. Caprio exhaled slowly, and the silence that followed was unbearable. Even the air in the courtroom seemed to hesitate. Ethan's smirk was gone now. His hands tightened around the edge of the podium. "The boy's family did everything they could," Caprio went on. "Money, lawyers, pleas. But you can't buy away the sound of a grieving parent in a courtroom. You can't buy back innocence once it's lost." He looked up, meeting Ethan's eyes. "That boy stood right where you're standing, arrogant, defiant. And then one mistake turned his entire world into a lifetime of regret." The young man swallowed hard, trying to mask the unease creeping into his expression. Caprio leaned back slightly, his tone softening, but his words sharp as truth. He thought he was untouchable, that the law was just another thing money could make disappear. But when you take a life, when you destroy trust, you realize there are debts that no wallet can pay. Ethan crossed his arms, his voice lower now, defensive. "That's not me," he said quickly, breaking the silence like a stone through glass. "I'm not that guy." The judge's gaze didn't waver. His tone stayed gentle, almost paternal. "Not yet," he said quietly. The words landed like a verdict, not of guilt, but of warning, a truth wrapped in compassion. The camera closed in on Ethan's face, the arrogance gone, replaced by something else, the first flicker of realization. Judge Caprio looked down at the case file again, but his eyes lingered, his expression unreadable. The story had been told, but its echo hung in the air, waiting to change what came next. The courtroom lights dim slightly as the clerk wheels in a small monitor. A faint mechanical hum fills the silence. Judge Caprio adjusts his glasses, his tone calm but deliberate. "Mr. Romano," he says, "we're going to review a piece of evidence together. I'd like your full attention." Ethan shifts in his seat, visibly annoyed, but he leans back with a smirk, trying to play it cool. The screen flickers to life, a dash cam recording from a patrol car. The sound of tires screeching fills the room, followed by a blur of headlights cutting through city streets at night. The video shows a black sports car, Ethan's car, weaving through lanes, nearly sideswiping another vehicle. The speedometer climbs past 50 in a residential area. Gasps ripple through the audience as the footage captures a near collision at an intersection. A pedestrian, barely stepping back onto the curb. The car roars past, disappearing into the dark. When the clip ends, silence swallows the room. Ethan's grin fades, his jaw tightening. The confident posture that once screamed superiority now looks like defense. Judge Caprio looks at him quietly. "That was you, correct?" Ethan hesitates, eyes fixed on the blank screen. "Yeah," he mutters finally. "That's me." The judge leans back slightly, his voice calm but laced with something heavier. "And that could have been someone's father, someone's child." He lets the words hang. "Do you see that?" Ethan looks up, his throat tight. "I didn't hit anyone," he says weakly. "No," Caprio replies softly. "You didn't. But not hitting someone doesn't make you innocent. It makes you lucky." The judge turns to the bailiff. "Bring the officer forward, please." A uniformed officer steps up, recounting how they followed Ethan that night. How he refused to pull over for nearly half a mile, laughing when they finally stopped him. "He said he was just having fun, Your Honor," the officer recalls. A wave of disapproval moves through the room. The sound of quiet sighs and head shakes fills the air. Ethan's face tightens. For the first time, his eyes drop. Caprio studies him carefully, his tone never rising, his control unshakable. "Fun," he repeats. "You call that fun?" He looks down at the citations on his desk, 6 in total, spread neatly in front of him. Each one represents a moment when you decided your time was more important than someone else's safety. "Tell me, Mr. Romano." He pauses, looking straight at the young man. "If someone had been hurt, if someone had died, would it still be a joke to you?" The question lands like a blow. Ethan opens his mouth, but nothing comes out. The silence stretches. Somewhere, a chair creaks as someone shifts uncomfortably. The faint hum of the ceiling fan seems louder now. Ethan's hands grip the wooden podium, his knuckles pale. His lips part slightly, but no words form. The only sound left is his own unsteady breathing. Caprio's voice softens. "You have no answer," he says gently. "And that's good. Because sometimes silence means you're finally starting to listen." The young man's shoulders slump. He blinks, his eyes glistening under the courtroom lights. The screen behind him still glows faintly, a frozen image of headlights cutting through the night. A reminder of how close arrogance can come to tragedy. The camera moves in, capturing Ethan's face up close. For the first time, guilt replaces pride. For the first time since he walked into the courtroom, Ethan stood tall. Not with arrogance, but with the weight of realization. His hands were no longer stuffed in his pockets, no smirk hiding behind indifference. He looked directly at Judge Caprio, eyes heavy but honest. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. The young man who once treated justice like a game now stood before it, humbled. His voice broke the silence, low and unsteady. "Your Honor, I was wrong." Caprio's expression softened, but he said nothing. He wanted Ethan to speak freely. "When I came in here," Ethan continued, "I thought this was just another ticket, another thing I could pay off. But it's not. I watched that video, and I realized I could have hurt someone, maybe even killed someone, and I laughed about it." His voice trembled on the last word. "I didn't think about the people crossing that street, or the families that would have lost someone because of me. I just thought about myself." He paused, breathing shakily. "I want to apologize. To this court, to you, Judge, and to the city. I acted like I was above the law, but you showed me that respect isn't something you buy. It's something you earn." The audience, usually restless, sat completely still. Even the officer who testified earlier looked moved. The quiet inside the courtroom was no longer heavy with tension. It was filled with understanding. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly, resting his hands together. "That takes courage to say," he said softly. "Owning up to a mistake is harder than pretending it didn't happen." His voice carried that signature warmth, the mix of authority and compassion that had guided so many lives before this one. "You're learning, Ethan. And that's what this courtroom is really for. Not to punish, but to teach." Ethan nodded, his eyes glistening as he whispered, "Thank you, Your Honor. I don't deserve this kindness." The judge smiled faintly, his tone steady but kind. "Don't thank me," he said, pausing for effect as the camera closed in on his face. "Prove it." The line lingered in the air like a verdict of hope. Ethan lowered his head, nodding once. Around the courtroom, people exchanged quiet, knowing looks. Something had changed, not in the law, but in the boy standing before it. And as the gavel rested motionless, the moment felt less like an ending and more like the beginning of redemption. The courtroom was quiet again, not heavy this time, but peaceful. The storm had passed. Judge Caprio sat still for a moment, studying the young man before him. Ethan stood with his head bowed slightly, hands clasped in front of him, the arrogance long gone. The air carried a softness, like the calm after rain. Caprio's eyes lifted from the case file, and when he spoke, his voice was measured, deep, and full of meaning. "Mr. Romano," he began, "what you've learned here today isn't about fines or penalties. It's about perspective." His words moved slowly, each one deliberate. "Respect isn't about money. It's about humility. Justice isn't about punishment. It's about growth." Ethan raised his eyes, and for the first time, he didn't see a judge sitting before him. He saw a man who cared enough to teach him what no amount of wealth ever could. Caprio leaned back slightly, hands folded, his expression gentle but resolute. "You see, son," he continued, "the law exists not to break people down, but to build them up. My job isn't to make you afraid of this courtroom. It's to make you understand it. Because understanding leads to change. And change," he paused, letting the silence fill the space, "is where real justice begins." The words lingered in the air like a sermon for the soul. Even the audience seemed changed, their faces softened, eyes reflective. Ethan nodded quietly, his voice low but clear. "Thank you, Your Honor." Caprio gave a faint smile, the kind that said more than words ever could. "You're welcome," he replied. "Now, go do something good with what you've been given." Ethan turned, walking toward the exit. Each step felt lighter, like he was shedding the weight of pride he'd carried for odd years. The courtroom doors opened, spilling daylight across the polished floor. For a brief second, he paused and looked back, not in fear, but in gratitude. Judge Caprio met his gaze with the calm wisdom of a man who had seen hundreds of such moments. Moments where one decision, one sentence, could alter a life forever. As Ethan disappeared into the light, Caprio exhaled softly, glancing down at the next case file. Another name, another story, another chance to guide. He straightened his papers, adjusted his glasses, and spoke gently to the clerk. "Let's proceed." The piano score rose faintly in the background, tender and reflective. The camera lingered on the judge's face, tired, kind, unshaken. And then, as the narrator's voice returned, the music deepened into a soft, emotional swell. "Sometimes," the voice said, "the richest lessons come from the poorest moments.